Very pleased to have United States Senator Rob Portman from the great state of Ohio alongside. Rob, a few years back we were colleagues in the House, both serving on the Ways and Means Committee. Look at you now, United States Senator. Tell us about the work you are doing in the Senate and where are your priorities in terms of the people of Ohio and what's going on in the United States.
Well, first, JD, great to have you back on campus here on Capitol Hill. And some of you don't know, but JD actually did some broadcasting in Cincinnati, Ohio. Still has a lot of fans there. But look, I'm honored to represent our entire state now, not just one district. And the country's in trouble, and I'm focused on the economic issues and the fiscal issues. We have the weakest economic recovery we've had since the Great Depression. We need to give this economy a shot in the arm, and this administration is not doing it. There's some obvious things we can and should do. I've put together a specific jobs plan that all the Republicans are comfortable with, which includes tax reform, getting the regulations under control, actually developing these energy resources we've got in this country, expanding exports. It's a shame that we aren't doing that. We aren't doing it because the president has not gotten what's called trade promotion authority done. You know all about that. And then on the international side, JD, let's face it, our country's in trouble too. Our role in the world is unfortunately been diminished over the past 4 or 5 years to the point that our allies don't trust us and our enemies don't fear us as they should.
Senator Portman, that was underscored yesterday in the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Not so much the proceedings there, but the social media response from ISIS. This time, thankfully, no cruel beheadings, but essentially criticism, perhaps even lampooning the Senate hearing yesterday. What does it mean to have an enemy engaged in such brutal tactics and yet seemingly so savvy with the use of social media and the internet?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. If you look at what they have done, the horrific beheadings we all know about, but it's well beyond that. There's a humanitarian crisis there. They're actually telling Christians in Iraq, as you know, either convert, pay a fine that they cannot afford, or face execution, die by the sword, as they say. And it's not just Christians, it's other religious minorities. In fact, it's Muslims, Shia and Sunni alike. And then finally, as you say, they're very media savvy and very focused on what's going on around the globe, and they've made it clear that they intend to attack the West, and that includes us, because we are, in their eyes, the enemy. So I think we have to face up to it. This is a situation that none of us wish for, and the president has tried to wish it away. I think in many respects the administration has been at war with itself, and I think you saw that in the hearing yesterday. You heard General Dempsey say, it may be necessary for us to have at least some special forces on the ground there. And that's not what the president's saying.
And this, again, Rob, is a real concern. All the media outlets pointing out General Dempsey is saying one thing, President Obama is saying another. Is it possible to have a unified voice, not so much Republicans and Democrats, but the commander-in-chief and his commanders in terms of the approach being utilized?
I sure hope so, and that's where we ought to be, J.D. You and I served here together, and we're going to have differences on issues. At the water's edge, we ought to be sure that partisanship is minimized and that we come together as a country. And that's what's happening now, I hope, is that we will, in this continuing resolution that we're about to pass, give the president what he's asked for in terms of some funding for some training, which many of us called for a couple years ago, to be able to fight ISIS on the ground. Not American ground troops, but in this case the Free Syrian Army and maybe others. And we should try to come together as Americans, but we've got to have a consistent message and we have to have a strategy. The one thing that my constituents are looking for is, what's the plan? We know this group is a terrorist group that we have to stop, and yet we do not have a comprehensive plan to do so. So we're looking for a plan. In the meantime, I hope our country can come together as one, as we did after 9/11. You remember on 9/12 we were all together as Americans, not Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and we've got to get back to that in this fight against ISIS.
Well, you mentioned what is going on. There is going to be a vote today in the House. We are hearing from people on the left and the right. It is precisely a lack of a plan that is going to have them voting no. Do you expect these resolutions to move through Congress with great support for the president and the unanimity you're talking about?
I don't think we'll see the support that we hope for, as Americans, because of the lack of a plan. Whether it passes or not, I just don't know, JD. I assume it will, because we've been put in this very difficult situation we didn't have to be in. If we had left the residual force in Iraq that many of us were calling for, not combat troops, but intelligence, trainers, some special operators to be able to respond quickly, The ISIS group, which at that time was probably 10 or 15,000 fighters, now we're being told it may be 30,000. That group could have been stopped. We didn't have the intelligence. We weren't monitoring it. We didn't have the ability to respond. The Iraqi army, because of the lack of the trainers and the lack of leverage we had on Maliki's government, were not able to respond. So we're in a much different situation than we would have been in had we done the right things then. But now that we're in that situation, I think it's incumbent upon us to figure this out as Republicans and Democrats and be sure that we are supporting the American people and their security and our national security.
Well, speaking of the American people, they head to the polls now in what, less than 50 days, another midterm election, 1/3 of the Senate seats up. And as we know, one election gives way to another. There has been some speculation, Senator Portman. You were mentioned prominently, perhaps for the number 2 spot on the ticket with Mitt Romney in 2012. Your name is mentioned again as a possible dark horse candidate for the presidency. And, of course, our former colleague, your governor, John Kasich's name coming up as well. How do Friends approach all this chatter about 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
Well, we are friends. My focus, as you know, is on 2014, and that's when the voters go to the polls first. As you say, it's less than 50 days now, and it's a consequential election because it will determine the Republican or Democrat majority here in the United States Senate. Why does that matter? Well, because right now you've got Republicans in charge in the House. They've passed 300 bills that have died here in the Senate. This would give us a chance as Republicans to take up that legislation, have an honest debate about it, allow the American people to see the contrast between the two parties, actually send some to the president. He would sign some of it, I believe, including Keystone XL pipeline, which should be approved to add more jobs and make us more energy independent. And that, to me, is the necessary first step toward 2016 and beyond. So I'm focused on that, JD. As you know, I'm the national chairman for the fundraising for the Republican majority. I think it's incredibly important for our country. We take that first step here in November, and that's my focus.
Well, we understand that focus, and yet, what would you say to people who say, Governor Kasich, Senator Portman, will there be a favorite son to emerge from Ohio, the site of the 2016 GOP convention?
Well, I don't know, but we are really excited about having the GOP convention in Cleveland, Ohio. It's great for Cleveland, but honestly, JD, I think it's great for our party. We're going to have a good, fun time there, but also going to talk about the diversity of this party, the fact that we are the party that's going to help the middle class get back on their feet. We're the party for jobs and opportunity and growth. And no better place than Cleveland. It's a city that's emerging. It had some pretty tough economic times there, still does, has some challenges. But it's a really exciting story of what's going on in Cleveland, Ohio, and really other places around the country where cities and states are doing some of the right things, despite the headwinds from Washington and the lack of progress here in the United States Capitol.
Well, spoken like a true statewide office holder, because truth was Cincinnati was in the running for the convention as well. You're a Cincinnatian. As we look ahead, I guess it prompts the difference, thinking of your days in the House representing the Cincinnati area, now being statewide and in the United States Senate. Is the Senate a frustrating place? Do you miss those days in the House on the Ways and Means Committee? Yeah.
The answer is yes.
But not enough to leave the Senate of your own volition yet.
No, look, I want to change the Senate, and it's not because I feel like we just need to change it for the Senate's sake. We need to change it for America's sake. You know, some of these issues, JD, have been left to languish too long. We have record levels of debt. Our deficit continues to be well beyond what anybody thinks is acceptable. It's bad for the economy. And then these issues like reforming the tax code. I mean, let's get busy with it. If we don't, we're going to see more companies and jobs and investment going overseas. Washington is falling down on the job. We're not doing what we should be doing here in Washington, D.C. And that, to me, means we ought to change the leadership here in the Senate. We ought to put forward pro-growth, pro-jobs legislation. We ought to deal with the debt and deficit and restore America's place in the world, because that leads to more peace and stability.
Senator Rob Portman, Republican of Ohio. John and Francesca, you will note when I asked about 2016, I did not get an explicit denial right there.
And it'd be hard to say no, and it's easy to invite these types of comparisons and speculation. It's way too early, as we mentioned many times, to say absolutely not. So we'll look forward to hearing more from Senator Portman on any prospects he has for the White House.
You bet. We will continue to talk to my friend, the senator, who may be my friend, the candidate, yet again, and his friend and my friend, John Kasich, too. Wouldn't that be interesting in Ohio? But he's standing here smiling pleasantly, so I think he's going to have a non-denial denial. Right?
Well, yeah, that's true.
Exactly.
And we'll check back in with you.
We'll see what happens. If we get the Republican majority in 2014, it sets the stage for success in 2016 for whoever the candidate is. If we don't, JD, honestly, I think is tough, because then you don't have a Republican agenda. People tend to view our party as the party of no, we're not. We're the party of reform.
And the four-letter word time has gotten caught up with us, Rob
Excellent.
Portman.
All right,
Thanks
JD.
so much.
Saved by the bell.
Rob Portman
Good to see you,
from
pal.
Ohio. More to come from Washington in a few minutes.
All right, JD, we'll check in with you here throughout the program a little bit later on. Much more to come here on America's Forum as well. You just saw that interview with Rob Portman. We're going to get to some other topics of importance today, and we'll keep you updated on those top stories. And we're waiting to see if that vote is going to happen today in the House on the president's plan to arm the Syrian rebels. But you heard Senator Portman there kind of laugh almost in frustration at the lack of the plan coming from the White House. We'll have the whole crew back with you right after this.